"Get that old man out of my conference room." He didn't lower his voice when he said it. He wanted everyone to hear. Augustin Marsh was sitting at the far end of the table when those words landed. 71 years old. Gray cardigan, reading glasses on a chain. A thermos of coffee he'd brought from home, because the office kind gave him acid reflux. He set the thermos down slowly and looked up at the man who'd just said it. That man was Kendrick Slade, 34 years old. Founder and CEO of Slade Digital Group. $40 million in venture funding. A corner office with floor-to-ceiling glass and an espresso machine that cost more than Augustin's first car. And right now he was pointing at Augustin like he was a piece of furniture. Someone had delivered to the wrong address. "Sir," said a young woman near the door. His assistant, Priya, 26, 3 weeks on the job. "Mr. Marsh is the consultant hired by your legal team for the Hendricks account." Kendrick didn't look at her. "I didn't hire him. Someone on my team made a mistake. Get him out." 12 people around that conference table. Junior analysts, senior account managers, 2 people who had worked with Augustin before and knew exactly who he was. Neither of them said a word. Augustin picked up his thermos. He tucked his folder under his arm and he walked out. He didn't say anything. Not because he had nothing to say. Because he had learned, over 71 years, that some conversations aren't worth starting in front of an audience that isn't ready to listen. But the walk to the elevator was longer than usual that afternoon, and something that had been resting quietly inside Augustin Marsh for a very long time was beginning to stir. Calverton, Ohio sits 40 minutes east of Columbus on a 2-lane road that most GPS systems still refuse to acknowledge. Population 12,000. Give or take, a water tower with the town seal fading on the side. 2 diners, one of which closes at 2 in the afternoon, and one of which should. A public library that doubles as a polling station every November. This is where Augustin Marsh grew up. He was the third of 5 children. His father worked the loading docks at a regional freight company for 31 years. His mother taught 4th grade at Calverton Elementary and ran the church choir every Sunday with a voice that made strangers stop outside the windows on Wednesday evenings just to listen. Augustin was the quiet one, the one with the notebook. He drew floor plans as a child, the way other kids drew cartoon characters, compulsively, obsessively on every available surface. The backs of cereal boxes, church programs, the margins of library books, which got him in considerable trouble. By 16, he had taught himself the basics of structural drafting from a textbook he found in the discard pile at the Calverton Library. The librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Holt, noticed what he was doing and ordered him 3 more books through interlibrary loan without him asking. He never forgot that. He studied architecture at Ohio State on a partial scholarship and 3 part-time jobs. He graduated in the top 4% of his class. He went to work for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Hargrove and Associates, where he spent 6 years learning everything he wasn't taught in school. How buildings actually fail, where the money goes when a project bleeds. Why the most beautiful design in the world means nothing if the load-bearing math is wrong. In 1987, he left Hargrove and started his own firm. Marsh Structural Design Group operated out of a converted 2-bedroom on the east side of Columbus for its first 3 years. Augustin was the architect, the bookkeeper, the receptionist, and occasionally the janitor. His wife, Rosalind, handled contracts and client communications while working full-time as a hospital administrator. Their son, Miles, spent his first 2 years of life in a bouncy seat next to a drafting table. The firm grew, slowly at first, then the way good things eventually grow, not with noise but with gravity. Other firms started calling, then larger clients, then government contracts. By 2001, Marsh Structural Design Group had 43 employees and a reputation in the Midwest that architectural journals had started noticing. Then Rosalind got sick, stage 3 breast cancer, diagnosed in October, gone by the following July. Augustin closed the firm 8 months after she died. He told people it was a business decision. It wasn't. He simply could not sit in those offices, surrounded by the work they had built together, and function. So he folded it, sold the assets, paid every employee 3 months of severance out of his own pocket. He spent 2 years doing very little. He read, he cooked badly. He drove to Calverton some weekends and sat in the church where his mother used to sing and let the quiet work on him. Then gradually he came back, not to running a firm. He didn't have the appetite for that anymore. But to the work itself. He began consulting independently. Structural review, project oversight, the kind of detailed technical assessment work that requires someone who has seen enough projects fail to know where the cracks hide before they appear. He was good at it, better in some ways than he had ever been running a company. Because now he had nothing to prove and nowhere to be. He could simply look at a structure and tell you the truth about it. That was what Kendrick Slade's legal team had hired him for. The Hendricks account, a contested commercial development project in downtown Columbus with a structural dispute that had been sitting in litigation for 2.5 years. 3 engineering firms had reviewed the plans. All 3 had come back with conflicting conclusions. The lawyers needed someone who could cut through the conflict and give them something they could take into a courtroom. They called Augustin. He had reviewed the documents for a week before the meeting. He had found the problem on day 3. Not a crack in the plans, a flaw in the foundation assessment, a load distribution error so subtle it had slipped past 2 licensed engineers. The kind of error that doesn't show up until you know exactly where to look. He had driven 40 minutes to Columbus to present his findings to a room that hadn't waited 30 seconds before deciding he didn't belong there. He sat in his car in the parking garage for 11 minutes before starting the engine, not crying, not angry, just letting the weight of it settle the way it always settled, slowly in the chest. Then he drove home. Miles Marsh was 29 years old and managed a sports media startup in Columbus. He called his father that evening the way he always did, not because Augustin asked him to, but because it was a habit he had kept since his mother died and had never seen a reason to break. Augustin told him what happened, all of it. Miles was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Which account was it?" "The Hendricks Project." Another silence. Longer. "Dad, that's the Hendricks Project. The one with the foundation dispute?" "Yes, the one that's been in litigation for 2.5 years and cost the developer $11 million so far?" "That's the one. And you found the error, I found the error." Miles exhaled slowly. The sound of a man doing math he doesn't like. "Did you tell anyone before you left?" "No. So Slade's team still doesn't have the answer they brought you in to find." "That would be correct." A long pause. "Dad, you need to send them your findings." "I know. Not because of them. Because it's the right thing. And because you did the work." "I know, Miles." Augustin sent the report that evening. 12 pages. Clean, technical, precise. The kind of document that requires no credential explanation because the work speaks with enough authority that credentials become secondary. He sent it to the legal team contact, not to Kendrick Slade. He expected nothing back. He was wrong about that. Raymond Cho was 51 years old and had been Slade Digital's general counsel for 6 years. He read Augustin's report at 10:30 that night, with a cup of tea getting cold beside him. He read it again at 11. Then he called his structural engineering contact, a woman named Dr. Lena Ferris, who was in bed in Cincinnati and took the call anyway, because Raymond never called after 9 unless something was real. She reviewed the report remotely. She called Raymond back at midnight. "He's right," she said. "Completely? Completely. This is the correct finding. I can't believe the other 3 firms missed it. Actually," a pause, "I can. They were looking at the top of the structure." He went to the foundation assessment. "That's where you look if you've been doing this for 50 years. Raymond sat with that for a moment. "Who is this man?" Lena asked. Raymond looked at the report header. "Augustin Marsh, Marsh Structural Design Group. That firm closed years ago, apparently." "Raymond, I know that name. I've cited his work in 2 separate cases. He's considered one of the most reliable structural assessors in the Midwest, possibly in the country in his field." A pause. "How old is he?" 71. Silence. "Raymond, where is he?" Calverton, Ohio. You need to fix whatever happened, tonight if possible. Raymond called Augustin at 7:15 the following morning. He apologized. He did not do it with corporate language or careful hedging. He said plainly, "Mr. Marsh, what happened in that meeting yesterday was wrong, and I am sorry. Not on behalf of the company. I'm sorry because it was wrong." Augustin listened. "I've had your report reviewed by an independent structural engineer," Raymond continued. "She confirmed your findings. Your assessment is correct. You found what no one else found in 2.5 years. "I know," Augustin said. "We would like to retain your services for the litigation phase. You would need to testify in deposition and potentially at trial. As the identifying expert." Augustin poured coffee. A deliberate act, a man not being rushed by anyone. "And Kendrick Slade?" he finally asked. Raymond was quiet for a moment. "He knows I'm making this call. He doesn't agree with it. Does he know what I found? Yes. Does he understand what it means for the case? He's beginning to." Augustin set down his coffee. "Send me a formal retention agreement. I'll review it." "Of course, and Raymond?" "Yes? The rate in the original contract stands. I don't adjust pricing based on who apologizes." A pause, then a short, genuine laugh. "Understood. I'll have it to you by end of day." The deposition was scheduled for a Thursday morning in a glass-fronted office building in downtown Columbus. Slade Digital's full legal team. Opposing counsel, a sharp woman named Vivian Burke, who had spent 12 years in construction litigation and had the kind of patience that unnerves people who mistake it for disinterest. A court reporter, a videographer, and Augustin Marsh in a navy blazer and the same reading glasses on the same chain, with a copy of his 12-page report and 2 pencils in his breast pocket, because he had always used 2 pencils and saw no reason to stop now. Vivian Burke introduced herself and got directly to work. She was good. She asked the right questions in the right order, the kind designed not to confuse but to build. Slowly, carefully, until the structure she was constructing became clear to everyone in the room. She asked Augustin to walk her through the Hendricks Foundation assessment, step by step. He did. He spoke the way someone speaks when they don't need notes, because the knowledge lives in the hands, not the head. He used precise language when precision was required, and plain language when it was more honest. He drew a quick diagram on a legal pad without being asked, because a diagram was clearer than another sentence, and handed it across the table. Vivian Burke looked at the diagram. She looked at Augustin. Something shifted in the line of her shoulders. Barely visible, the shift of a lawyer who has just confirmed what she suspected. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "are you saying the load distribution error was present in the original foundation assessment submitted at the time of permitting?" "Yes, and in your professional opinion, was this error detectable at that stage?" "Yes. With the appropriate review protocol, and the 3 engineering firms who reviewed this project subsequently. Did any of them identify this error?" "No. Why not?" Augustin paused for exactly the right amount of time. Because they were each given the same framing. They were asked to review the project against existing safety standards. None of them was asked to re-examine the foundation assessment itself. He set his pencil down. "I was hired to find the problem. So I looked for the problem. That's a different task than confirming what's already been submitted." The court reporter's fingers had slowed. Vivian Burke wrote something on her own legal pad, underlined it. Across the table, Kendrick Slade's lead counsel, a man named Patterson, made a note and said nothing. At 2:47 p.m., the deposition concluded. At 3:15 p.m., Vivian Burke made an offer to Patterson in the hallway. A settlement offer, significant enough that Patterson called Kendrick Slade from the stairwell. Augustin waited in the lobby with his thermos and read an article about migratory bird patterns in a magazine he'd pulled from the rack. At 4:02 p.m., Raymond Cho walked through the lobby doors, with his coat over his arm and an expression on his face that was equal parts relief and something harder to name. "They want to settle," Raymond said. "I gathered. The number is significant. I assumed it would be." Raymond sat down across from him. "Mr. Marsh, I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead. When Slade had you removed from that conference room, you had already found the error by then. Yes. Why did you still send the report? Augustin looked at him. Because I was hired to do a job, Raymond. Not by Kendrick Slade, by the legal team, to serve the legal process. My feelings about what happened in that room don't change what I found, and what I found needed to be in the hands of the people who could use it. Raymond was quiet. The work is the work, Augustin said simply. That doesn't change based on how someone treats you. What happened next moved faster than Augustin expected, and with a shape he had not anticipated. Vivian Burke filed a post-settlement motion, requesting that the record reflect the identification of the foundation error and the name of the expert who had identified it. It was an unusual motion. Judges don't always grant them. This one did. The court record now read, in plain language, that the structural defect at the center of a 2.5-year, $11 million litigation had been identified in a single week by Augustin Marsh, independent structural consultant, formerly of Marsh Structural Design Group, Columbus, Ohio. That document was public record. A reporter at the Columbus Dispatch named Teresa Okafor found it 3 days later while scanning construction litigation filings on a slow Tuesday. She read it twice. She Googled the name. She spent the next 40 minutes reading archived articles from architectural journals and old news features, and a Sports Illustrated. Not the sports kind, a special issue on American innovators. From 1998 that had included a quarter-page photograph of Augustin at 43, standing in front of a building in downtown Columbus that his firm had designed, squinting slightly into the sun. She called Raymond Cho for comment. He gave her one on the record, without clearing it with Kendrick Slade first. Mr. Marsh identified a structural error that had evaded review for over 2 years. His contribution to this case cannot be overstated. He is one of the most consequential structural assessors I have worked with in my career. She called Vivian Burke. Vivian Burke said, he found it in a week. He came in with a thermos and 2 pencils, and he found what 3 firms missed. That's the story. She tried to call Kendrick Slade. His assistant said he was unavailable. The article ran on a Thursday. Metro section, above the fold. Headline: the consultant they tried to remove, and the error he found anyway. It got picked up by the AP wire by Friday afternoon. By Saturday, it was in the architectural trade press. By the following Monday, Augustin had 47 voicemails and an inbox he could not face before his second cup of coffee. He did not give many interviews. He gave 3, on his own terms, to publications he respected, and he said the same things in all 3, phrased differently each time, because he was not reading from a script and refused to start. He talked about the work, about what it means to look at a structure honestly, about the particular discipline of going back to the beginning, not accepting the frame you've been given, but asking what frame was never questioned. He did not talk about Kendrick Slade. He was asked 4 times. He declined 4 times. That's not the story, he said. The interviewer pushed. But aren't you angry? Augustin thought about that. I've been doing this work for 40 years. I've been dismissed in conference rooms before. Not always as directly. But the feeling is not new. He paused. What's new is that people are paying attention to it now, and I'm not sure that changes the thing itself. What does change it? He thought again. The work. The work changes it. When the thing you do speaks clearly enough that the dismissal doesn't hold. That's the only answer I've found that actually works. Miles drove to Calverton the weekend after the article ran. He sat in his father's kitchen and watched Augustin ignore his phone and cook eggs, with the focused attention of a man who has decided eggs are worthy of his complete concentration. 47 voicemails, Miles said. 49 by now, probably. You're not going to listen to them. I'll listen eventually. I'm not in a hurry, Dad. Miles set his coffee down. Do you understand what just happened? A case settled. A $38 million case settled because of what you found. Your name is in a federal court record. The AP wire picked up a story about you. People are calling, I know, and you're making eggs. Augustin put a plate in front of his son. He sat down across from him. Your mother used to say the worst thing that can happen to a person is that they stop knowing what they actually value. He poured his own coffee. I value the work. I value this kitchen. I value that you drive here on Saturdays. He looked at his son. The phone calls are fine. The article is fine. None of that is the thing. Miles looked at his father for a long time. The way you look at someone when you suddenly see a version of them that has always been there, but that you are only now old enough to actually see. He picked up his fork. These eggs are good, they are. I've been practicing. Kendrick Slade's response, when it came, was not what anyone expected. He did not go on television. He did not post a statement. He did not do the thing that every media consultant in the country would have advised him to do, which was to get ahead of the story before the story got ahead of him. What he did was send a letter. Handwritten, 3 paragraphs on plain paper, not company letterhead. Delivered by courier to Augustin's address in Calverton. Augustin read it twice at the kitchen table. The letter did not make excuses. It did not offer elaborate explanations or legal hedging. It said that what happened in the conference room was indefensible. That Kendrick had replayed it in his mind more times than he wanted to admit, and that he was sorry, in the way you are sorry, when you know. The word is not big enough for what it needs to carry, but you say it anyway, because silence is worse. He also wrote that he had looked up Marsh Structural Design Group, that he had read the archived material, that he had not understood, when Augustin walked into that room, who he was. The last line read, I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did. Augustin folded the letter. He put it in the kitchen drawer where he kept things he intended to return to. He sat with it for a while. He did not call Kendrick Slade, but he did not throw the letter away. The following spring, on a Saturday morning that smelled of cut grass and something coming into bloom in the neighbor's yard, Augustin Marsh walked into the Calverton Public Library. He had been there dozens of times since returning to live in town. He knew every librarian by name. He knew where the architecture section was, even though it was small and somewhat optimistically organized. But today he walked to the reference desk and asked to speak with whoever coordinated community programming. A woman named Adeze looked up from her computer. She was maybe 40. Reading glasses she kept forgetting she was wearing. A coffee mug that said not all who wander are lost, which she had clearly been given as a gift and was too polite to replace. That's me, she said. What can I help you with? I'd like to offer a workshop, Augustin said. Free, open to anyone, basic structural literacy. For people who own buildings, or plan to. Or who just want to understand why structures fail and how to ask the right questions before they do. Adeze looked at him. What's your background? 40 years in structural architecture and consulting. Independent practice, previously Marsh Structural Design Group out of Columbus. He paused. I have some time now, and this library helped me become who I am. I thought it seemed like the right place to come back to. Adeze looked at him for a moment the way Mrs. Holt had looked at a 16-year-old boy with a discard pile textbook 55 years ago. How many sessions? She asked. As many as are useful. Saturday mornings? Saturday mornings would be fine. She made a note. She looked up. Can I ask you something? Yes. I read the article in the Dispatch, the one about the Hendricks case. She paused. Were you nervous? When you walked back into that building for the deposition, after what happened? Augustin thought about it honestly. Yes. What helped? He considered the question the way he considered most things, unhurried, without performance. I thought about why I was there. Not about the man who'd tried to remove me, about the work. About the fact that I had found something true, and the only responsible thing to do was bring it forward. He looked at her. When you're clear about why you're in a room, it's harder for someone else's behavior to define what the room means. Adeze nodded slowly. She wrote something else on her notepad. First workshop, she said. Let's say 4 weeks out. That gives me time to promote it. That works. He turned to leave. Mr. Marsh. He looked back. The library is glad you came back. He stood there for a moment. 71 years old, gray cardigan, reading glasses on a chain, the water tower outside the window with the fading town seal, the smell of old books and something floral from the display by the door. "Me too," he said. "I've been sitting with this story for weeks, and I keep coming back to the same moment. Not the deposition, not the settlement, not the article or the 47 voicemails, or even the letter Kendrick Slade sent afterward. The moment I keep coming back to is the parking garage. 11 minutes. Augustin sitting in his car, not crying, not making calls, not immediately writing emails or planning his next move. Just sitting with the weight of what had happened, letting it settle. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being dismissed. It doesn't stop hurting just because you're right. The hurt and the rightness exist at the same time, and you have to hold both of them. You can't skip the 11 minutes by having the facts on your side. What you can do, what Augustin did, is decide that the 11 minutes don't get to be the whole story. He went home. He sent the report. He did the work. And I think about the version of this story where he didn't. Where he drove home from that parking garage and let the hurt make the decision. Where the report stayed in his folder. Where a 2.5-year litigation stayed unsolved. Where Kendrick Slade never got to sit with what he'd done and decide, in the privacy of a quiet evening, to put pen to paper and try to say something true. None of that happens if Augustin Marsh makes a different decision in that parking garage. Tell me, have you ever stayed in the room after someone tried to remove you? Have you ever sent the report anyway? Have you ever let the work speak when you couldn't? Drop it in the comments. I'll read every single one. And if this story found someone who needed to hear it today, share it, pass it on. Because some people are sitting in parking garages right now deciding whether to go back in. They need to know it's worth it. Subscribe and hit the bell. Because next week, I'm bringing you a story about a woman who spent 30 years cleaning floors in a hospital. And the morning the entire board of directors stood up when she walked into the room. Don't miss it.